This is Making Better Decisions. I'm your host, Ryan Sullivan. Decisions are where rubber meets the road for organizations. Each week, we'll be learning from people who are on the front lines of turning raw data into better outcomes for their organizations. This show is sponsored by Canopy Analytic, helping companies make better decisions using data. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Making Better Decisions podcast. Today's guest is a data-focused leader and an experienced entrepreneur with a strong track record in AI and SaaS sectors. He is an author and business school instructor, has built a platform that brings machine learning and generative AI to the masses in a marketing automation solution. Please welcome co-founder and CEO of Squark, Judah Phillips. Welcome to the show.
Thanks. Awesome to be here, Ryan. I'm excited to be on your show. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for coming. All right, so I want to dive right in. I want to start with the same question that we ask everybody. What is one thing that you wish more people knew about using data to make better decisions?
It's a great question. And I'm glad I get a shot at that question like everybody. You know, when I think about it, there are a number of things. The first thing is that you have to ensure that the question you're trying to answer can be answered by the data that you have, right? That's like a sort of 101 thing, but I think it's really important to understand. You know, my experience, and this even happened this morning, actually. I got a email from a CEO and, you know, he had some questions about forecasting and, you know, thought it would be really cool if we could, you know, do something with AI. And indeed, we can certainly do something, but the data that he wants to use to predict doesn't exist, or it doesn't exist in the right format, or exist in a system that, you know, the sort of data collection, the ETL hasn't been set up for, right? So there's going to be some work to enable that. And obviously analytics people, AI people, they're very busy and they work on scheduled roadmaps and prioritized projects. So, you know, interpolating that in, we have to be really judicious about it, right? So that's my first piece of guidance, which is, you know if the question you're asking can truly be answered by data. You know, another thing related to that is to, you know, understand the type of question that, or type of answer that would be required for the question. So this actually happened to me in a different scenario this morning, just before we got on the call, where a team wanted to understand the impact of current events on sales, essentially, right? And, you know, that makes sense, right? If you ask that at a high level, as you know, it seems a reasonable request. But what really are they looking to answer, right? And it turns out when I started to dig deeper, they're looking to answer, you know, what will be the duration in days of the sales impact post the event, right? And then, you know, related to, you know, knowing that you can answer it and understand that with the data and understanding, you know, what is going to be the acceptable answer, what your stakeholders are looking for. There's also understanding whether I guess this relates to my first part of the answer, is whether the data you have already collected that you believe to be sufficient truly is sufficient. Oftentimes there were gaps. In the second use case this morning that came up, it's clear that in order to answer it, there's going to be some feature engineering required and some new data collected and some new ways to think about, you know, the existing data that would help make that analysis relevant. I also think that you have to look at like resource availability and, you know, infrastructure availability, in order to, you know, actually deliver. So I would probably concentrate on those, you know, things, right? Knowing that it can be answerable with the data, knowing that you have the data, understanding exactly what you want to answer, making sure you fill in any gaps based on that, and then ensuring you have like the correct allocation of resources and like potentially, you know, systems or server capacity infrastructure to do that.
Yeah.
Oh, and then one more thing that comes to mind, revenue impact.
Sure.
Like this is a super important thing for me because, well, I've been, an analyst and, had a lot of people asking me to, you know, if or me asking them if they want fries with that. I've sort of, over the years, not sort of, certainly gained in seniority. And, one of the things that companies live and die by is revenue, right? And everything costs money to do. And so when you're looking at a company that, let's say, doesn't have maybe the free cash flow of a Google, right? Or, has a CFO or has, economics within P&Ls and business units. You want to make sure that
Mm.
the projects that you take on and the work you do is actually actionable and has a direct impact on the business. And, there's two really ways to impact a business, right? It's either increasing revenue or reducing costs. So if given those constraints I put on, you can then also wrap that request around, an ROI or a financial impact pro forma, that you think will result from getting the answer and being able to take action. Well, you'll get further, right? If there's a big impact, then from a revenue or cost savings perspective, than if not, right? And I feel like that is often one thing that is devoid of in many requests that I've gotten over the years.
Mhm.
Even today, like the first one, like I understand, the time savings for the executive who's been asked by his boss to do it, right? But I don't
Mhm.
really know what action they're going to take. There's a few I could name. Whereas in that second request this morning, I know from the gentleman who requested it that the direct revenue impact is there, or at least it's, an influencer of a direct revenue impact. So focus on those things and, always in the business, tie it back to the dollars in the simplest way, right? Increase revenue, reduce costs. Could argue boosted efficiency, but that's really reduced costs, right? So that'll
Yeah.
get the attention of the people in the, in the leadership roles or in the C-suite, right? It's not just analytics for analytics sake or, oh, great, we have more data to help us or confuse us. It's that it's tied
Yeah.
to, business.
I love that. I love all three of those. One of the things that I'm interested to learn from you on is kind of the intersection of data and AI.
Mhm.
I think there's kind of a couple different populations out there. And so you have one population that's just kind of like, you guys do computers, right? Then you have another population where it's kind of like, all right, well, like data and AI are kind of one thing, kind of, different. They're just different tools in the same bag. And then you kind of have people that actually like really do that work and know that, you know, pulling in a rectangle of data that's already been cleaned and making some visualizations on it is very different from saying we have siloed, unclean data in many different locations, and we're going to pick a very specific machine learning algorithm or a neural net or like something very specific and generate a very specific result with it. So, I think one of the things that would be very interesting to listeners who don't have a deep background in artificial intelligence is maybe if you can share a little bit about what are some of the most tangible limitations of AI. I think the possibilities of AI right now have really captured the public's imagination. We've seen artificial intelligence tools come into, public conversation. Everybody is talking about ChatGPT, and they don't have to understand anything about back propagation or neural nets or transformers or any of these things that actually make it work. So I think that there's, sometimes this idea of we're going to shoot the moon or this will be the first initiative that we do or we're going to like make a lot of what you talked about with like maybe we don't have the data for this. Tell me a little bit in very simple terms, what are these artificial intelligence tools and what are some of the things that maybe shouldn't be our first step with them?
Wow, that's a really big question. So I'm in a lot to
Yeah.
unpack there. So let me sort of reflect on the question and kind of give some context, and I'll start like at a broad level in a broad space,
Yeah.
narrow it down.
Yeah.
Um, First of all, what is AI? Right? Like
Mm.
I have been working with like statistics and machine learning, quote unquote AI for, could argue almost 2 decades now. Starting when I was at Monster Worldwide. And even before that, I mean, in statistics for 3 decades. But I really, in Monster and big job site, 16 years ago, we did churn models and, predicted who was likely to, no longer be a customer, or we would do
Mhm.
personalization and predict like what based on behaviors or demographics or firmographics, what experience to render. And those were all machine learning based, predictions. So we go back to the question, like, what is AI? It means a lot of different things to different people. Wow.
Mhm.
And, even vending like predictive AI with Squark in the early days, there was still a lot of confusion. People, you know, didn't have the data, they didn't have the time, they didn't understand, the outcome. So when you start to like group AI, um, I mean, there's a lot here, and I'm sure there's some folks who'll say I may in this answering this quickly omit a few things, but largely there's um, supervised machine learning, semi-supervised machine learning, and unsupervised machine learning. So, starting with the
Mhm.
latter, like unsupervised machine learning would be something like clustering, where you're packing a
Mhm.
parent-child relationship, like the IDs on receipts and the SKUs on those receipts, and you want to cluster the data together to see like set co-occurrence, to see like, oh, when people buy bread, do they buy milk and cheese more likely? Do they buy bananas, right? And retailers have
Mhm.
used that type of unsupervised machine learning, these task-focused clustering algorithms to predict how to merchandise shelves for a long time. Like, what if you have three shelves, like an end cap and two sides, should you put based on the affinities between the product so that people will like pick them up, like putting
Yeah.
sunscreen next to beach towels or, beach toys, right?
Yeah.
It's like those things are not just necessarily serendipitous that are merchandise. So you have these
Yeah.
unsupervised, algorithms. And this could include, affinity analysis, market basket analysis, clustering, things like that, a whole bunch.
Yeah.
And then
Absolutely.
on the other side, you have like this supervised stuff. And the supervised stuff is where you're learning from historic data and you're going to, do something arguably to that data to make it fit the needs of different algorithms, which will then, do what they do and produce a result. Right. And so, and then you have semi-supervised where it's, humans are somewhat in control or in the loop of that stuff. But and that gets a little nuanced. But if we focus on like the two main categories, um, the supervised machine learning is what you're seeing today that makes companies a lot of money. And that tends to be around right, predicting things, right? And when I mean predicting
Yes.
things,
Yeah.
it could be predicting, as I said, who's going to churn. So we learn from all your customer data in a CRM or an EDW or some data system, and each feature or field in the data attribute, is overloading here, but called a feature in AI. It could be categorical, could be numeric, could be a text string, right? A category, a time stamp. And you're looking maybe on a row by row basis at your customers. You have this, to your point about a rectangle of data, you have columns and rows. Each row is a record. Each record has an
Yeah.
ID, right? And then things about the customer, what they bought, when they bought it, who they bought it from, behaviors and stuff, demographic, firmographic. And you know that this person, churned or didn't churn or bought again or didn't buy again or bought these products or didn't buy these products. Well, you can learn from those relationships and then do inference, right? Using a model to then score the probability of a customer churning or a customer buying again or a customer buying a particular product. Um, or uh, what experience to serve, or how much their
Yeah.
lifetime value might be. So, or how much they might spend on a particular product, kind of a request for quote or a pricing type of model. All that's in the domain of supervised machine learning or supervised AI. And that stuff's used all the time to great effect by companies. As a matter of fact, like 96% or something of the spend is really on like predictive AI. And what's unique to me is that, we started building that on Squark, pre-pandemic, right? And I guess I can announce it on here. I won't announce who, but we recently sold the company in May, right? So while I still am the CEO of Squark, I do have another entity that owns Squark now. We'll announce it in August. So always fun to have an exit. And it was precisely because of these types of use cases that Squark could do that the customer had been doing for 5 years with Squark, that as the business grew and as, the economics of other tools or alternatives to do what we did came into view, it was clear Squark had the capability, the cost effectiveness, and, fit for purpose. And it was around use cases like this. I'll go back to that in a second, meaning like predictive AI. Say generative AI, right, is also supervised, right? It's something that you're learning from. There's more to it. There's, GANs, generative adversarial networks, and stable diffusion models, and, the large language models that you see, and, RAG and LangChain and all that jazz. But largely, like, instead of training on your customer data, these, in addition to training on your customer data, these like LLMs train on these huge data sets, like all of Wikipedia, like all of the internet, the common crawl, and any source of data that they could possibly crawl, the New York Times, right? And as a result, you see lawsuits and you see people questioning, copyright and all that jazz around this stuff.
Yeah.
And the result of that learning isn't to build a model that predicts customer level outcomes, but in this sense, those models are predicting what is the next word, right, to say, right? It's the next level, like it's predicting the next word in a very sophisticated way. And so what's happened is over the years with transformers and Google and, humans have turned language into math. Like you've heard about embedding, right? And being able to sort of tokenize language into like numbers. And essentially these LLMs are going through some pretty complex and sophisticated math and, proprietary approaches that aren't in open source that we know about in certain companies. And they're very quickly and intelligently being able to select what word comes next as it, in real time, right? As it pops up on your screen. And these models they're not dumb in the sense that they're just taking the most frequent next word probability, right? There's a lot of bespoke programming and trade secrets that allow, given a prompt, the language that's generated to be constrained, right, to be relevant and, accurate. And as you've seen, like, ChatGPT 2, if you ever use it, go to like 4.0, like that capability has become stronger and stronger. And so in like very discrete and finite places like programming and where like the space of language is well known, SQL, right?
Yeah.
These things do really well. We talk about some of the negatives like the hallucinations after, but there are also some like capabilities within like generative AI, like retrieval augmented generation and LangChain, that in the case of LangChain will allow you to say like this response is good or this response isn't good or this document is good or not good, for the results to be refined. Whereas in like RAG, that the generation is constrained to like the facts within the architecture that the documents that you've uploaded. So there's also like small language models, and that's where maybe RAG, not that we don't know all what's going on in ChatGPT or Cohere or Anthropomorphic. We don't know all the details of all these. Though some models are open sourced. In that sense, we don't know. There's like these small language models, right, that will constrain the language through RAG that allow you to generate like information and responses based on like your own text, right? So it's kind of a subset of large language models, small language models. So you've got like generative and predictive AI. And what's interesting is like the generative AI, not very good for doing the predictive AI, and the predictive AI really doesn't do what the generative AI does. Like in Squark, we use like
Yeah.
transformers to extract features from text. So when we see like a large corpus of text, we'll extract the top noun phrases and meanings and words, and we'll create new columns with a weight per row of like whatever we find in that column. So if we find like a bunch of text around like maroon, cerise, magenta, maroon, right? A dark pink or something, we'll create a new column called red, for example, and give a weight of how much redness for those colors are expressed, just as an idea. You could do anything,
Sure.
happiness, sadness, sentiment analysis.
Mm.
So we'll use those transformers, but like that's to create better data for training, so we have better predictions. Whereas we're producing numbers, and large language models are producing words. So there's a difference between the two, and I think like the immediacy, Ryan, of like the ChatGPT 4 interface and the fact that it's telling you
Yeah.
things and it generates some really like great, if you prompt it well enough, like language that can help you be more efficient or answer questions or refine your own work, summarize things, that's really popped in people's mind as like, what is AI, to answer my initial question, right?
Yeah.
But like I would encourage readers or listeners to understand is that, the world of AI is a lot bigger than just generative AI, though it's everybody's, using, or use
Yeah.
like extremely online people, everybody's using these large language models. Um, but predictive AI is different. Um,
Yeah.
and that's where the money
100%.
is being made.
I think so I do, well, I mean, my background is in mathematics. Like, I'm more than capable of going out and doing artificial intelligence. I guess, if you were to line up all of my math cohort, right, I might be considered a sellout for doing more simple data and analytics and everything like that. One of the things that I actually think is really, really interesting about your response is kind of exactly the same way that I feel, which is when we talk about AI kind of in the public imagination, AI seems to me to just equal, ChatGPT. When you're just talking to people, they're like, oh, as you mentioned, like, I know what AI is now. Like, I type something in there and it like talks back to me. When I am consulting with a client, so you get all sorts of different requests. Sometimes they're like, we know exactly what we want. Sometimes it's like we have a direction. Sometimes we don't know at all. Sometimes it's like, well, we want to do AI. And it's like, oh, okay. Like let's figure out, what are you trying to do? Like, what's the business problem? But
Mm-hmm.
all of that stems essentially from my understanding of exactly what you mentioned, which is that AI, machine learning, whatever umbrella term we want to put over all of these things, they're a very individual, group of tools. And there are cool new tools that get made, but exactly as you mentioned, right? Like if I'm trying to do a clustering analysis, like feeding that information into Chat GPT, like might give me something, but is certainly not the best tool for the job. So what I always encourage people to do is to kind of balance two things that you've mentioned. Number one is to make sure that you're very specific on what is the business problem that I'm trying to solve. So, like, if I'm trying to figure out how my customers are going to churn, okay, well, that's the objective. Let's pick the best tool to actually do that. And we focus on the one model that will give us the answers to those questions, as opposed to saying we're going to AIify our business because that's cool right now.
Yeah.
The other big thing that you mentioned is having this perspective of return on investment. So I think there's a couple different pieces that are incorporated in that. Like number one, just like the same thing as like traditional analytics, like just like doling out heaps and heaps of cash to like embed different AI tools in all these different parts of the business. That's typically, not going to be a high return on investment proposition, right? Like being very targeted, picking the right tools and focusing on problems one at a time, or at least, some small number in parallel is typically the way that we'll see great returns with analytics, with AI, with anything, right? Like if our focus gets too diffuse, it's just kind of we lose track of what we're doing and it's hard to see results.
Mm-hmm.
The other big thing that I think that matters a lot when you're talking about return on investment with artificial intelligence is kind of coming back to the basic economic theory, which is every business has a, core competence area. There are things that we're really good at. And then there's everything else. And it's impossible, as you mentioned, because we have to optimize for finite resources, including, the knowledge of the people that work for us. A lot of companies, like, sure, like you mentioned, like Google, I mean, they already have core competence here. They have an army of some of the best and smartest software developers and, AI and machine learning specialists in the world. If you look at another company, one of the big things that I look at is like, sure, could you efficiently build something like this given infinite time and resources? Absolutely. But is that your core competence? Maybe, maybe not. It depends a lot on the business. And so one of the things that I think is really exciting is, looking at a tool like Squark or, as we've seen the public's imagination, the venture capital sphere and all of these things get really energized by AI, what that means is that there are now going to be an ever increasing amount of tools that are made so that we don't necessarily have to internally understand all of the nuance of all this machine learning and artificial intelligence and math and all this stuff. There are people who are out there that do understand that is their core competence, whether it's a product or a consultant or whatever the case may be. We can now take that and put that into our business to solve problems for us. And that's the really exciting thing for me is like having, all the nerds out there go out and make commercially viable solutions to lots of different problems and then seeing how that all snaps together to make new businesses.
Yeah, you bring up some really good points. As I sort of reflect back on what you said, like the reason why I think AI is talked about in the C-suite a lot and like why people are making moves for, correct or, perhaps misguided is that, you have to have a strategy around this stuff, right? You can't really
Hmm.
bury your head
Yeah.
in the sand or under a blanket and hope it goes away and your business continues to thrive. I mean, the reality is all business have superior growth periods, and then they start to wane a little bit. They could die. So I think the bigger companies and, mid-market, even smaller businesses, want their superior growth period to be as long as possible and not to die, right? And this is purported by, experts and companies that have been successful with it to like have an economic value, to have an economic impact. But to your point, like, just buying tools and doing things because it's quote AI or machine learning, that might get you, slide in a board presentation or, a line in an update or, something that, is short-term benefit. And the risk is, does that turn into long-term benefit? You have to kind of think
Yeah.
through what you want to do and how it impacts the business. And so, what sells in AI? Like I'm one of probably the few people in the world that has sold giant enterprise deals to, and our first customers was IBM, when Watson team bought the tool in the early days.
Yeah.
Nielsen, other companies I can't name, DHL, is that like I didn't sell it to data scientists and I sold it to business people who fund the
Mm.
data science teams on use cases. And that's what I would I would answer to you and the listeners is that you make money on AI on use cases. And those use cases,
Yeah.
address a business problem that you're having, and those, depending on who is buying, that problem may be the person's problem, the team's problem, the company's problem. The reason they're buying it is, they want to keep their job, get their bonus, or make the company more money. They could be altruistic or intrinsic, extrinsic benefits for the purchaser or the team. But it all comes down to success is boiled on use cases. Like, what are you going to do? So like, when I talk to people about this stuff, it's like one of the first things I ask, like, well, what do you want to do with it? And if it's just,
Mm.
well, we're
Yeah.
kicking the tires. Well, we want to do some AI. Like, we have a service to solve for that. Right. But I'm not on a call on the first call to like teach people what this stuff is, right? It's really to get to the heart of the matter,
Yeah.
which is what do you want to do with it and how is it going to make you money or make your business better, in the professional context. So you need to have those use cases. And different tools do different use cases. So like if you want to, index all your textual document, around marketing, your collateral and stuff, and you want to like then generate revisions or new content, based on ideas you have that you could express in prompts, small language models, right? Pretty good for that because, you get the right one, it's not going to hallucinate that much, if at all, and it will be able to generate in context, and your prompt solid information from your marketing collateral and themes and, concepts within it. If you go and like upload your marketing collateral to, ChatGPT 4.0 and you don't have the right switch turned off, like you've just given that data away for training for everybody else. So whatever competitive advantage you thought was expressed in your language has just been, you gave it away. Or if you
Yeah.
pitched off that learning, the shared learning, well, it's going to generate responses that, could be sufficient and might be really good, or they may contain factual errors or hallucinations because it's using a wider corpus than just like a small language model. Now, if your goal was to like, use marketing collateral to predict, who's going to churn, well, I mean, there's some ways you could do that, right? But that's not really like a very straightforward or kind of wise use case for predictive analytics at face value.
Yeah.
So you'd want to like elaborate a bit more on that. And then like from a vendor perspective, it's like, well, how do you buy software? People who don't buy software don't know how they buy it. So if they don't know how to buy it, they're not buyers. Do you have a budget? Do you sign, right? Things like that. And then you screen them out. And the buyers tend to be those people who have that clear use case and that line of sight to
Yeah.
resources and the data, especially to how they deliver it. Like when I'm selling or have sold this stuff, it's like, well, what's Squark? Kind of an unusually named thing. So, you explain what it is. Predictive analytics, then like, what's the use case? Customer data, we're doing churn, for example. And then they want to know, well, what data do I use? Well, let's use our CRM data, right? And what,
Hmm.
well, who's going to do it? Well, we're going to teach your team, or we're going to put in, a resource for a month to teach your team so you can learn to fish, and, it gets done. And so it's like, you have to tie to those use cases. And I think like, that's probably another reason why like people in AI at the current time are compensated pretty well, because either they know how to elicit what needs to get done in the business context and then like apply the tools and the technique to it, either like as leaders or as, individual contributors that then can generate those results. To your point about
Yeah.
tools, there's like so many different tools. It's almost a state of perfect competition. But generally, the tools will do prediction, right? They could potentially do time series forecasting. Like that's a little bit different, but we do some time series forecasting, like decomposing cycle and trend and seasonality and being able to predict not just one number, like in a regression, but multiple numbers.
Yeah.
And then there's even things like causal, AI that I didn't even talk about in the first answer, which is like a more emergent branch of AI that's focused on like cause and effect relationships. And, it's about a lot of the stuff I described, like looks at correlations and patterns in the data, whereas like
Hmm.
causal AI is looking more at the mechanisms around like what are those, patterns and correlations to be able to, um, know what happened, like counterfactual stuff. Like if I didn't do that marketing campaign, what would happen, right? You can understand incremental lift. So different tools will do different things, and you have to have a very clear line of sight to like the use case that you want to do and its business impact and the data and who's going to do it in order to be successful with it. And like, I mean, I've just been doing this for a long time, so it's super easy for me at this point in my professional career to like, and that's what I do, I guess, fairly well above average, is like go in there and I can understand the business and the technology and how AI could impact it. And then I can very quickly and accurately, identify what could be done given the current state, what could be done given the future state or future state desire. Where are the gaps in that? How to close those gaps and how to sort of sequence the capital such that you get a result on the things that are low business effort, high business impact as you ladder up your maturity
Yeah.
to get to the higher, potentially higher business impact, higher, more difficult, problems later on. higher level of effort. So I think like, you're right when you think
Yeah.
about
I love I love the focus on kind of the business first, and that, this is something that I preach a lot, whether it's analytics, data infrastructure, engineering, artificial intelligence, any of this stuff is really like you are running a business. That business's purpose is usually clearly defined. Whether actually, even if it's like a nonprofit, like whatever type of organization it's in, your goals ideally are fairly well defined.
hmm Yeah.
Those are the goals.
Yep.
Right? Like some department doesn't like make up their own goals, at least, hopefully. So for me, it's all about driving towards those and having a clear picture of, okay, we're going to try to do X. What are the tools that can help us achieve that goal? And you're right. Like, I think that there's a lot of really incredible stuff. There's new stuff every day. The stuff that's out there gets better every day. So it's really a time of, exciting opportunities, but I don't think that, as you mentioned, we should just recklessly abandon the idea that, the business has a purpose and our, job is to try and help it reach it.
That's ultimately
Now,
like the highest, or not to interrupt, Brian, but that's ultimately the highest order, right? Helping the business. In my career
yeah.
at various levels, some people like, have some consternation about working with sales teams, sales guys, selling people, and like, listen, the sales guy is the only reason you have a job, and then the executive leadership, they may not know, like, a lot about your fat-tailed auto-aggressive model, or, how to interpret a classifier or whatever. But the reality is, like, they don't need to. The goals will come from the board. They'll be translated by the CEO to his line of business leaders. They'll OKR,
Mhm.
they'll do whatever they do, whatever, approach to translating that into tactics, and they'll be reflected down. And it's in those things that you can sort of, those artifacts of management and strategy, that you can boil up what you need to do with, AI, or boil it down. What's interesting is like, this is just the facts of the matter, and this is probably somewhat of a controversial statement. Is like, well, this stuff is meant to be human in control. It's not controversial, but it may be different. People say human in the loop. I think human in control. And there's this idea that like, you need to have a PhD, or you need to have, some really sophisticated data scientists on staff. And depending on the, industry and what you're trying to do and the available tool sets, that may very well be true. And certainly if you're building data science software, you need data scientists, right? Certainly if you're like,
Yeah.
modeling pharmacological effects, or, things that where, human life is on the line, maybe it makes sense to have more humans in control and more bespoke coding to enable that stuff. But when you're looking at
Yeah.
like industry, like things like marketing or sales, or, merchandising or retail, you know, um, you know, a lot of money is wasted, right? Just regardless. Fortunately, generally, like, people's lives aren't on the line. And the idea of this stuff of giving you more just value from reducing that waste, even if you reduce it by 10%, can be pretty significant, or improve conversion by, 10%. So
Yeah.
my take on it is that a lot of it can be automated. And what we've seen with Squark over the years, as we sort of built this out from an MVP to do binary classification, to multinomial, to regression, to time series, to do explainable AI, and different, automated feature engineering and automated result summary, and all sorts of stuff that like humans would normally do. And that result is it goes faster, cheaper, like less expensive, right? Reduced cost. And the results are as good, if not better, than humans. And
Mm.
that's controversial because, I'll go in and try to sell. So I don't sell the tool to data scientists, you know, frankly, like, and I told this to my friend Jeremy Atchin over there at a competitor years ago, like, data scientists can only say no. They generally have no budget. Maybe the VPs do, the SVPs do. They're, but they're still getting that from the business, and they're still delivering against a business roadmap. They're not just sort of pontificating, statistical fantasy in their groups. Maybe some are, but
Yeah.
they're trying to focus on that. And so, data science teams, I just can't say no. Like, they think they can do it better themselves. Like, they went to school to do it, and also they've been told they're like sexiest job of the 21st century. They're all very usually intelligent, capable people who want to get involved in things and apply their intelligence and capabilities. And so, tell them upload the data and click a button and you're going to get results that are as good as you, doctor, can do. It's super controversial to some. And what I found out is that like the best data science leaders get it and automate a lot. And the best data scientists know when to use this. It's kind of like asking a coder today, like, do you just code from your head or book? No, like whatever. They use Copilot. They go on ChatGPT 4, right? I actually heard an anecdote about a friend of mine is a consultant in the space, and he went to big bank where they banned ChatGPT 4, and he gave a lecture, and like two guys came up to him after, and they're pretty senior, and they were like, well, we bring in our own laptop and our phones and we use ChatGPT 4 on the fly. And he's like, I'm up for a promotion as a result of it. Right. And so like how I've like countered objections from data scientists has been like either to acknowledge that, they have some good point and, unrelated to the discussion and, sort of move that piece over there. We'll talk about it later. Or I will explain to them that if we're right, well, we've just freed a lot of your time and you can focus on some higher order things and things that you really want to do because we just freed 80% of your work. And if we're wrong, which we haven't been, well, then you're right. Only you can do it, right? You're the sort of the golden child in the White Tower and, everybody should knock on your door and, hope that you answer and like Rapunzel, let down your golden hair. But the reality is, I've seen it over and over again where this stuff like the automated tools win. Not in all, like in pretty much all the cases I've seen, but I can understand in some industries that are people I've talked to where, there's a risk for doing that because of the human lives in the equation. In
Yeah.
selling a company, right? Like people, people want to kick the tires. And there was an entity that we didn't end up selling to that, we spent some time kicking the tires and they sort of got their, PhD level data scientist on the phone. And she eventually admitted that like the models were just as good, if not better than the stuff we do by hand, and it didn't really go anywhere after that, it just kind of like petered out because I think that was hard for the business to reconcile. They probably were like, well, why do we have this giant team doing this if this is the case? Meanwhile, one of our customers, came in and ended up buying us. So I think you can automate a lot of it. I think some of it, will be automatable and some of it, you probably want to have more humans in control on it when human lives are at play. Like I wouldn't want to
Yeah.
automate, ballistic missile defense detection without like human overrides, You got a war game scenario with Matthew Broderick, thank you for playing.
Yeah.
Play some tic-tac-toe, how about a nice game of tic-tac-toe?
Absolutely.
So, yeah, but the reality is like this stuff is just getting more and more automated. And one thing we didn't talk about is like agentic AI. And so when you talk about like, well, what do I select and what do I use? And then how does it, relate to something else? Historically, there's been like this idea of like decision intelligence. And this is not a new concept. It's like 8, 9 years old. You see it as a emerging trend in like the Gartner slopes of enlightenment or whatever. But decision intelligence was this idea that you could use AI to make better decisions, whether human or automated, and that by combining the results of models, you can make even better decisions, like multi-link models. Like off the door with Squark, like, hey, here's the churn customers. Here's, their, and that's their likelihood of churn. Here's, how much if they didn't churn from a lifetime value or, next 48 months perspective or however long your business cycle is, here's what they would be worth. And so like now I, got a model that predicted churn. Now I got a model for those high probability churners of the loss, the risk, the financial risk. And then I might build a model that predicts, well, what marketing offer do I make out of 10 marketing offers to reduce this churn or N number of marketing offers? And the model will say, hey, for, Ryan, send offer 5, followed by offer 3, followed by offer 2, but Judas sent offer 9, followed by offer 1, followed by offer 10, right? And so I get like individualized sequence. And it's like, so going from churn probability to financial risk, and for those financially risky potential churners, here's the offer to make. That would be like a multi-link decision intelligence model. Now, when you get into like agentic AI, and this stuff is new, it's fuzzy, people talk about it, but that's, I think, the way it's going. you have these capabilities that may be somewhat autonomous that can break a complex task, like segment it into discrete activities that it then needs to go and execute, right? Like, for example, if you had an agent to order pizza, I'm just joking, like you need to, you know what pizza place to, log into and how to log in and how to, need to know an order, how to select it, you need to know how to, buy the pizza, right? And then maybe you want to do an update as to when it's going to be delivered and confirm the delivery. These are all separate actions. And in theory, I'm joking a little bit, but an AI pizza agent would be able to deconstruct all those steps and then execute them. So when you start to think about that, like decision intelligence flow, which, yeah, you can script it right now, but I would probably do manually, right? There's this idea that agents are going to be able to do that work. And where you see like
Yeah.
agentic AI is in like, that's where we see a lot of it, but where you see a discussion about agents is in like customer service, you know? So companies like Maven AGI out here in Boston who are building an agent that will allow them to respond to tickets, right? And, potentially go beyond just saying, hey, well, you need to, fix your sequence in HubSpot, right? The agent will then tell you, hey, you need to fix your sequence in HubSpot and here's how you need to fix it. And then purportedly go in and like actually, execute calls that are like clicking on the interface and
Yeah.
fixing, right, the sequence. And so I think that's where it's going. And like the more complex business workflows there will be a level of like agents plugged into pieces of the business process that will be one or more models that work together with that human in control to supervise it. So like the nature of work is going to change for people. But again, like to build these, what do you need? You need data scientists, right? And to like get these
Yeah.
things implemented, you need strategists and people who can understand them in the context of the business, and need willing executives who are like creating strategies at the board and allocating capital and the sequence of that capital to deliver against those projects that have that high MPV or high internal rate of return. So you end up, making money in the long run from the investment. And I tend to think that's
Yeah.
where it's going. So when I start to hear people like, oh, AI is, bubble's about to burst. It's like, I've been in this space so long and like, it's not about to burst. And I hear like,
Yeah.
well, AI can't do this. That's like, yes, or, could, it may, in the future it will. And when I hear only people can do it, I start to just think like, it's a little bit of a dated thought. So the way I've always like to sell a company, you can sell what you did, but you're really like selling what you will do in the future. Right. And so similarly, I think as an executive and a leader or a person working in this, there's what you're doing today and what you're going to be doing in a year, 2 years, and 5 years. And I think like the best leaders in this space are not making it, they're not making decisions based on, what needs to get done only in the next 3 to 6 months, but they're looking at like 2, 3, 5 year roadmaps. And then how to benefit from this technology. And that's going to be rethinking resources, rethinking, capital and infrastructure, and rethinking like business processes in totally. So
Yeah.
there's
I
we're
think
still in the early stages, Ryan, like the conversations like this, people like you, exposing people in the industry to listeners who, can then learn from them. And people like me are like hands on the ground on, you're on the train
mm,
every day trying to move it forward. All of us are important in making it realer and creating these really cool capabilities into the future that I ultimately think like, I'm not like a FUD AI guy, like, oh, create Skynet, Terminator's going to come out, like world's going to get destroyed. I think like a little differently. I think it's going to change the nature of work, going to make people have more free time, and it's going to help our societies, get better. Whether it's, business stuff that we do, or as the government gets involved, through, better climate policies, through better energy, policies, better ways to reduce, crime, or to prevent, societies from eroding through misfactual misinformation. I think like AI, sure, could be used negatively, but I think it won't be. I think we're going to get what we deserve as humans. And I think what we deserve is a great world and a great culture. So I think the people in it are aware of that, and they hear all the FUD and uncertainty and sort of naysayers and Luddites talking about it. And I think people get that. And, we're all humans working to make it better and create these new architectures. And the idea isn't to like make the world worse, it's to make it better. And I think that's ultimately what's going to happen. That being said, right, we live in a world of capitalism, not altruism. So these things are going to occur based on, markets and the players in the markets. And so that's where like, citizens and governments and competitors and, workers and employees and consultants and leaders in those industries and those markets and those companies have to learn this stuff and have to participate in making it better. Or they
Yeah,
won't.
I think it's a super exciting future.
Agree.
I think that, there's definitely roadblocks and fears, but in general, I think it's going to be really, really interesting to see what happens. Um, Judah, I can't thank you enough for sharing as much of your time and experience as you have. Like it, just from getting to talk to you, um, it's extremely apparent that, like you've been in this space and thinking about it and doing it for a long time. And you were able to kind of distill all of that information for all of the listeners in what I found to be an extremely digestible way. I really can't thank you enough for taking your time to share that with everybody. If anybody loved what you had to say today, what might be a great way to reach out and connect with you?
That's it. Well, first of all, thank you for the kind words. Like I really love what I've been doing with analytics and data and AI for like my whole career, almost 3 decades now. So
Yeah.
it's great to have the opportunity. Like I count my blessings every day to be able to talk to intelligent people like yourselves, participate in, forums like this and just like actually get to, do this stuff every day. So I really love doing it. So thank you for those nice words. And I'm glad that it comes out when I talk to people about it. And I've also been trying to simplify it and make this stuff like ubiquitous. Like I really believe that like people should have AI, not just governments and companies. So a lot of my thrust of work has been doing that. So if you want to reach out to me, like probably the easiest and best way is LinkedIn. Like I'm on LinkedIn all the time. I've been there for over 20 years. And so I post ideas and thoughts and repost colleagues. And I do this humans of AI thing on LinkedIn. So every month or so, or when I have some free time, I'll just pick a random person I know in the industry and I'll write about them and say, hey, this is a human in AI, right? I'm also on X, formerly known as Twitter. I've been on there a long time. So I'm at Judah, at Judah. But that's not that. You'll see me retweeting a lot of pictures of space, basically. And every so often some professional stuff, but you can always reach out to me there. LinkedIn's the best. And I'm also at Squark, so Judah at squarkai.com if you want to reach out that way. And if there's any people wanting to kick the tires or potential buyers of some predictive and GenAI technology and something I said was interesting, I'd be happy to talk with you about that technology and anything else really. So reach out, always willing to lend a helping hand and really like to collaborate with people all over the world. So feel free to do that. And I want to thank you too, Ryan, for having me on, letting me pontificate, wax poetic on these questions. And, really appreciate your time and your leadership in the industry and amplifying the voices within it and helping your readers and your listeners educate themselves. You're part of the solution, right? And building a better future. And so thank you for your efforts too.
Thank you. Wow, that is very kind. I appreciate it. Thank you again for that. I also want to make sure to thank the audience. If you learned something, if you like something, please make sure to like, subscribe, share, tell a friend, give us a review, hopefully a good one. All of that stuff is a huge help in what Judah mentioned, which is kind of getting this information out to everybody to hopefully learn a little bit and, make their life easier, make their business a bit better. So Judah, thank you again so much for the time. And this has been another exciting episode of the Making Better Decisions podcast. Thanks for listening. That's a wrap for today's episode of Making Better Decisions. For show notes and more, visit makingbetterdecisions.live. A special thank you to our sponsor, Canopy Analytic. Canopy Analytic is a boutique consultancy focused on business intelligence and data engineering. They help companies make better decisions using data. For more information, visit canopyanalytic.com. There's a better way. Let's find it together and make better decisions. Thank you so much for listening. We'll catch you next week. Peace.